Have you ever caught a glimpse of a wagging tail down a lonely alleyway, or heard the faint whimper of a lost pup in the hush of night? Have you ever stopped to wonder what brought that dog to that particular corner of your world, and whether someone, somewhere, is desperately searching for them? If these questions tug at your heartstrings the way they do for so many animal lovers, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Where are you tuning in from today? Let us know your city, state, or country. And please take a moment to subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on more stories about kindness, connection, and the remarkable bonds that can form between humans and animals. Your engagement helps spread these heartfelt tales to others who might need a reminder of the good that still exists in our world. Now, let's embark on a journey that begins with a single lost dog and unfolds into a testament to the extraordinary power of unconditional love. Keanu first noticed the small dog on an otherwise ordinary morning. The sun had just begun its climb over the rooftops, sending long, golden beams across the sidewalk and illuminating patches of dew on uncut lawns. On his way to a routine dental appointment, Keanu glanced down a quiet side street and spotted a shape cowering near a rusted chain-link fence. At first, he couldn't quite tell if it was just a bundle of leaves or maybe a stray cat. But then, as if sensing his presence, the creature shifted and looked up. Two timid brown eyes met Keanu's own, and in that fleeting instant, the world around him seemed to fade away. He stood still for a few seconds, scanning the dog's appearance. The animal looked disheveled, formatted with dirt and leaves. A bright red collar, its once bold color now dull with grime, hung loosely around its neck. Mutagis. Thin ribs were faintly visible through the fur, and there was a slight limp in its hind leg. Keanu felt an immediate pang of concern. He had always been the kind of person who couldn't walk away from an injured bird on the sidewalk, let alone a lost dog that was clearly in distress. Unsure of how the dog might react, Keanu moved slowly. He kneeled down at a safe distance and extended his hand, palm facing the ground so as not to appear threatening. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. "Where'd you come from?" The dog didn't bark or growl. Instead, it just stared at him, tail lightly tapping the ground in a mix of caution and subdued hope. Keanu took a few more steps closer, speaking in a calm, reassuring voice. After a moment's hesitation, the little dog crawled forward and sniffed his hand, as if trying to decide whether the stranger could be trusted. Driven by instinct and compassion, Keanu decided to skip his dental appointment. He reached into his backpack, where he always kept a water bottle and a few snacks. Though it wasn't dog food, he offered the pup a corner of a peanut butter sandwich. The dog gulped it down with surprising speed, then stared up with an almost puzzled expression, as if to say, "What now?" Keanu gently patted the dog's head and checked the collar again for any identification. Nothing. Not even a phone number scribbled on the inside lining. It troubled him that such a friendly dog could be out here all alone. It had probably once belonged to someone who cared enough to give it a collar, but now it was lost, disconnected from whatever life it had known. Keanu's apartment complex didn't allow pets, but leaving the dog behind on the street wasn't an option he could stomach. He had a friend, Marie, who volunteered part-time at a local animal shelter. Perhaps she could help. With the dog limping slightly beside him, Keanu walked the short distance to Marie's place. Along the way, he tried whistling softly, hoping to see if the dog responded to any name at all. No luck. It simply remained close to his feet, as if not wanting to lose the only friendly face it had encountered in who knew how long. Marie lived in a cozy bungalow with a fenced yard. The moment she opened the door and saw Keanu standing there with a small, forlorn dog at his side, her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed. "Where did you find this little one?" Keanu explained the morning's events, how the dog had been cowering near the fence, the lack of identification, and the limp. Marie immediately led them to her backyard, where a covered patio offered shade and a few pet supplies were neatly organized in plastic bins. With an expert touch, she examined the dog's leg. "It's not broken," she noted, "but there's some swelling. Could be a sprain or an old injury." She then slipped a gentle leash over the dog's head. The creature wagged its tail a bit more confidently now, sensing the kindness in both humans. Marie offered it a bowl of fresh water and some dog kibble. As the dog ate, Keanu and Marie discussed the next steps. Usually, the shelter's protocol for a lost or stray dog involves scanning for a microchip, posting found dog notices online, and checking local neighborhoods for missing pet flyers. They decided to start there. If that didn't pan out, the shelter would keep the dog for a set number of days to see if an owner would show up. If no one claimed it, they would consider adoption options. But as Marie outlined the standard procedure, Keanu felt a growing desire to be more directly involved. After all, he had been the one to find this gentle, trusting pup. He felt a responsibility to ensure it ended up in the right hands, either back with its rightful owner or, if that proved impossible, in a new forever home. Later that afternoon, they took the dog to the local animal clinic for a quick examination and microchip scan. The veterinarian confirmed that the pup was a male, about 2 years old, and somewhat underweight. No microchip showed up on the scanner. The vet wrapped a small support bandage around the dog's sprained leg and recommended a week of limited activity, along with some mild anti-inflammatory medication. Keanu felt relieved that the injury was manageable. He couldn't imagine how much pain this poor dog might have endured while wandering the streets. Marie allowed the dog, whom they temporarily nicknamed Scout, to stay overnight at her house, promising Keanu she'd do everything she could to track down the owner. Meanwhile, Keanu returned to his apartment. That night, he found it impossible to concentrate on anything else. His mind replayed the image of those big brown eyes staring up at him with quiet trust. Even though Scout was safe for now, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. He scoured social media and local lost and found pet groups, posting pictures and a short description of Scout. The next day, he printed out flyers and drove around nearby neighborhoods, taping them to lampposts and community bulletin boards. Every time his phone buzzed with a notification, his heart would flutter with anticipation. Maybe this was it, the real owner about to claim their beloved dog. Yet day after day, no such call came. A few well-intentioned people reached out, offering leads that quickly went nowhere. Some recognized Scout as a dog they'd seen wandering around for a while, but none had ever witnessed him with a specific owner. During this time, Keanu visited Scout almost daily at Marie's. The dog quickly grew attached to him, leaping up with excitement whenever Keanu appeared. He spent his visits playing gentle games of fetch, limited by the sprained leg, and giving ear scratches that made Scout practically melt into his arms. They formed a bond so natural it felt as if they had known each other for years. A week rolled by without any leads on Scout's owner. Marie mentioned that space at the shelter was limited, and though she would do her best to keep him from being transferred to a more crowded facility, time was a factor. Keanu knew his apartment lease strictly forbade pets, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to consider any scenario where Scout might end up in a stressful kennel environment for an extended period. Over a cup of coffee, he confided in Marie about his dilemma. There might be ways around that, Marie said. Some landlords will allow an emotional support animal, especially if you can provide documentation. Or maybe you could talk to them about paying a pet deposit. It's worth a shot at least. Keanu had never considered the possibility of a dog living with him. His schedule was already busy. He worked part-time as a mechanic and also took evening classes in graphic design. Still, each time he thought about letting Scout go to an unknown adopter, his heart ached. That night, he decided to check the details of his lease. It was fairly explicit. No pets of any kind was underlined in the agreement. With a resigned sigh, he realized it would take more than a friendly chat with his landlord to change their policy. Meanwhile, as Scout's leg healed, his personality began to shine. He was gentle but playful, content to trot around the backyard with a ball in his mouth or curl up by Keanu's feet for a nap. Marie's own pets, a senior cat named Tigger and a middle-aged golden retriever named Sasha, tolerated Scout's presence well. In fact, Sasha seemed to adopt Scout like a little brother, showing him where the best sunny spots in the yard were and sharing toys as if they had been lifelong pals. Seeing Scout thrive, Keanu's resolve to find him a loving home only deepened. Although Keanu kept checking the lost dog postings, the more time passed, the more likely it seemed that Scout had been abandoned, or that his original owners simply weren't looking for him. The idea broke Keanu's heart. How could anyone neglect such a sweet animal? Then again, perhaps it hadn't been neglect. It could have been a family emergency, financial hardship, or any number of unforeseen circumstances. Either way, the reality was that Scout needed a stable place to stay, and soon. One afternoon, while Keanu was scrolling through online adoption forums, he noticed a heartfelt post by a family searching for a missing beagle. Their dog had disappeared weeks ago in a completely different part of town, and it clearly wasn't Scout. Nonetheless, Keanu was moved by their desperation. He reached out, offering sympathy, and shared a bit about Scout's situation. They responded with kindness, though they regretfully confirmed that Scout was not their lost dog. The exchange weighed on Keanu. So many pets, and so many families hoping to reunite, yet no matches for Scout. Marie, seeing Keanu's growing attachment, encouraged him to consider fostering Scout temporarily. It might not be a permanent solution, but it would allow him to be with you while we keep searching. You can worry about adopting him later if you can figure out your housing situation. He mulled over the idea, torn between wanting to help Scout and the fear of violating his lease. Yet the bond they shared felt almost predestined. By the time 2 weeks had passed since that fateful morning, Keanu was on the verge of making a bold choice. Sitting in his small living room, he rehearsed what he might say to his landlord, Mr. Watkins. He had been renting there for nearly 3 years, paid on time, and had never caused any trouble. Perhaps that history would work in his favor. In the end, he decided honesty was the best approach. He visited Mr. Watkins in his office the next day, describing the situation with Scout. He brought along photos and even a short note from the vet outlining the dog's good behavior and health status. Mr. Watkins listened politely, but his expression remained guarded. "Keanu, I appreciate your intentions," he said, tapping the folder documents. "But our building has a strict no-pets policy for a reason. We've tried allowing pets in the past, and it led to noise complaints, property damage, and tension between tenants. I'm sorry, but I can't make an exception." Keanu walked out of that office with a heavy heart. He had half expected this outcome, but it still stung to hear it so definitively. Back at Marie's, he looked down at Scout, who greeted him with a hopeful tail wag, oblivious to the complexities of human housing rules. Petting the dog's head, Keanu muttered, "Don't worry, buddy. We'll find a way." Another idea came to him that evening. He could temporarily bunk with a friend who allowed pets, at least until he sorted out a better long-term plan. After a few phone calls, he managed to arrange a short-term stay at a friend's place, Carlos, who lived in a small rental house with a fenced yard. The arrangement wasn't ideal, as Carlos already had 2 dogs, and the landlord there was iffy about adding a third, but it could buy Keanu and Scout some time. And so began an impromptu chapter of cohabitation. Scout and Keanu moved their essentials, some clothes, dog supplies, and Keanu's laptop, into Carlos's spare bedroom. Initially, Scout seemed cautious around the other dogs, a pair of rambunctious huskies named Luna and Orion. There was some tense sniffing and a bit of territorial barking, but soon enough, they settled into a manageable routine. Scout's smaller size and calmer demeanor stood in stark contrast to the high-energy siblings, but in a curious way, it worked. He would watch them chase each other around the yard, occasionally joining in for a short sprint before returning to Keanu's side, satisfied just to be included. As the days turned to weeks, Keanu kept up his efforts to locate Scout's original family. He posted updates on social media, expanded his flyer distribution to nearby towns, and asked around vet clinics. He even visited a popular local park on weekends with Scout, in case someone recognized him. But nothing. Scout's past remained as elusive as the dog's given name, and time pressed on. In the meantime, Scout's gentle temperament and easy adaptability amazed everyone who met him. Carlos's landlord grudgingly admitted he was impressed by how little trouble the dog caused. No chewing on furniture, no excessive barking, no soiling indoors. For Keanu, every day he spent with Scout reinforced the sense that they were meant to be in each other's lives. Perhaps, he thought, the dog was guiding him in ways that weren't immediately obvious. He noticed he slept better when Scout curled up near the foot of his bed, an unspoken assurance that he was no longer alone, even in someone else's house. And yet, a part of Keanu remained worried. Was he wrongfully separating Scout from an owner who might still be searching? Each day that passed without any claim made that possibility seem slimmer, but it also felt like a question that needed a certain answer. If no one came forward, Keanu wanted to adopt Scout officially. But how? His lease was non-negotiable, and living long-term at Carlos's was far from ideal. The tension weighed on him constantly. One afternoon, Marie called with surprising news. She mentioned that a local reporter from a small community newspaper was interested in doing a story on lost pets and the lengths people go to reunite them with their owners. Marie had forwarded the details about Scout, and the reporter was intrigued by Keanu's commitment. The next day, a photographer arrived at Carlos's place to take a few pictures. The article, published a week later, was a heartfelt piece that highlighted the challenges of lost pets and the emotional turmoil both animals and humans endure. The reporter praised Keanu's efforts to track down Scout's owner and ended with a call to action for anyone who recognized the dog to come forward. Keanu hoped that this wider coverage might finally yield a lead. For a time, he felt renewed optimism. Every ring of the phone set his pulse racing. But the calls that trickled in were mostly from people offering to adopt Scout if no one claimed him. A few calls were from folks who thought it might be their dog, only to discover it wasn't once they exchanged photos. While Keanu appreciated the outpouring of concern, the emptiness he felt whenever he realized it wasn't Scout's rightful owner lingered. He knew that, logically, every day without a lead diminished the likelihood that Scout had someone out there. Still, his heart wouldn't let him fully relax until all possibilities were exhausted. Meanwhile, the weeks had stretched into a couple of months. Keanu's part-time job at the mechanic shop was stable, but not lucrative. He mulled over the idea of moving to a different apartment building, one that would allow him to officially adopt Scout without living in constant uncertainty. The challenge was affording first and last month's rent, along with any pet deposits. Moreover, he was still in the middle of his graphic design classes, which ate up both time and funds. Relocating was a major undertaking. Yet every time he looked at Scout's trusting gaze, he felt nudged toward that difficult step. He started scouring online listings for pet-friendly apartments, even if they were a bit pricier or further away from his job. During lunch breaks at the mechanic shop, he'd scroll through housing ads, emailing potential landlords about their pet policies. The responses were mixed. Some places charged hefty fees for pets. Others had weight limits that excluded anything larger than a small cat. A handful of landlords sounded flexible, but the rent prices were almost out of Keanu's reach. Still, he kept at it. One evening, after hours of searching, Keanu found a listing for a modest studio apartment in an older building just outside the city limits. The rent was reasonable, and the landlord specifically mentioned being open to pets, as long as they were well-behaved and the tenant was responsible. Without hesitation, Keanu grabbed his phone and dialed the number. A middle-aged man named Mr. Hardesty answered. Keanu explained his situation succinctly, emphasizing that he had a dog who had been found homeless but was extremely gentle, house-trained, and quiet. Mr. Hardesty seemed receptive. "My wife and I love animals," he said. "We used to have a black lab ourselves. We just asked for a small monthly pet fee, plus references. If you can provide proof of stable income and a vet record for your dog, that's usually enough for us." Hope surged in Keanu's chest. He arranged a viewing for the next day, and as soon as he hung up the phone, he couldn't contain his excitement. He rushed to tell Carlos, who slapped him on the back in congratulations. Later, he called Marie, who practically squealed with joy. The next morning, Keanu loaded Scout into his car, determined to bring him along for the viewing so Mr. Hardesty could see firsthand what a gentle soul Scout truly was. They arrived at the older building, which had a bit of a vintage charm, arched doorways, wooden floors, and a small courtyard. Mr. Hardesty met them in the lobby with a warm smile. "So this is the famous dog, huh?" he said, bending down to let Scout sniff his hand. Scout obliged, tail wagging softly. They walked through the studio, which was small but cozy. Natural light streamed in from two large windows. A compact kitchen lined one side of the space, and a nook in the opposite corner seemed perfect for a small desk or reading area. Keanu pictured where he might place a dog bed, imagining quiet evenings spent with Scout curled up at his feet. After a brief tour, Mr. Hardesty led them into the courtyard, which, while not large, had enough space for Scout to explore on a leash. "I asked tenants with dogs to keep them on a leash in common areas," Mr. Hardesty said, "but you can walk them around the neighborhood. It's pretty safe here, and most of the residents are dog-friendly." Scout sniffed around, occasionally glancing back at Keanu, as though awaiting permission to be excited. Keanu smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. The place was no palace, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the uncertainties of living under someone else's roof with no formal allowance for a pet. "Let's talk about the paperwork," Mr. Hardesty suggested. So they returned to the apartment, where Keanu provided his ID, proof of employment, and references. He mentioned that the dog still technically belonged to someone unknown, but that he intended to adopt him if no one claimed him. Mr. Hardesty listened sympathetically. "Well," he said after some thought, "if the real owner shows up, I'm sure you'll do the right thing. Otherwise, I'm happy to welcome the both of you as new tenants. Just know there's a small pet deposit. Maybe we can break it up over a couple of payments?" Tears almost sprang to Keanu's eyes at the man's kindness. They shook hands, and by the end of that afternoon, Keanu had signed a lease set to begin the following month. On the drive back, he felt a surge of freedom. He glanced at Scout, who was snoozing peacefully in the passenger seat, and murmured, "Looks like we might finally have a home, buddy." Over the next few weeks, Keanu completed all the final steps, setting up utilities, scheduling a move out from his current apartment, and carefully packing up his belongings. He balanced these tasks with classes, his part-time job, and ongoing visits to Marie's and Carlos's to ensure that Scout didn't feel abandoned. As moving day approached, he made one final push to find Scout's owner, urging anyone with legitimate claims to come forward as soon as possible. But no calls or messages indicated that someone recognized this sweet dog as their own. Moving day arrived, and with help from Carlos and Marie, Keanu transported his boxes to the new studio apartment. Scout trotted around, sniffing the corners and wagging his tail when he discovered a corner that Keanu had already outfitted with a cozy dog bed. Mr. Hardesty greeted them briefly to check if everything was okay. Keanu assured him that the move was going smoothly. Standing in his new living space, Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of relief and possibility. It was a fresh start, not just for him, but for Scout as well. He set up a small area for the dog's food and water, arranged a basket of toys, and placed the vet's paperwork in a designated folder for easy access. Finally, he attached an ID tag to Scout's once grimy collar, now freshly laundered. On the tag was Keanu's name and phone number. He couldn't help but think back to when he first met the dog, lost, limping, and alone by a fence. Now, Scout had a place to call home, and for the first time in weeks, Keanu's mind was at ease. That evening, as the sun set behind the building, Keanu and Scout ventured out for a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were lined with trees, and the air carried the scent of jasmine. A few neighbors smiled and greeted them, some even stopping to admire Scout. Keanu introduced himself and briefly shared Scout's story. It felt like the beginning of a supportive community, people who might watch out for each other's pets and well-being. Back at the studio, Keanu prepared a simple dinner, pasta for himself and a bit of boiled chicken for Scout. They ate side by side, man and dog, forging a quiet companionship that spoke volumes without words. Later, Keanu settled onto an old but comfortable armchair and opened his laptop to work on a design assignment. Scout lay on the dog bed, head resting on his paws, eyes drowsy but content. Periodically, he would glance up at Keanu, as if checking to make sure that the one person who had shown him unwavering kindness was still there. The next morning brought a surprise that would test everything Keanu had built. A phone call from a number he didn't recognize jolted him awake. "Hello," he said, stifling a yawn. "Hi. I'm calling because I just saw an article about a lost dog named Scout. Are you the person who found him?" The caller's voice sounded nervous and uncertain. Keanu's heart raced. "Yes, that's me." He managed, try to keep his voice steady. "Did you lose a dog matching his description?" There was a pause. "I believe so, but I've been away for a while. And my neighbors said they last saw my dog roaming the streets after it got out of my yard. I've been desperately trying to find him. I was actually in the hospital," the voice faltered. "I'm only now catching up on everything." A cold fear pricked at Keanu's chest, but also a flicker of sympathy. The caller explained that they had run across the news piece only recently, as they were going through old online posts. The timing was uncanny. Keanu had just moved into the new apartment with Scout, intending to adopt him permanently. Yet here was a voice claiming to be the rightful owner. The conversation continued, with the caller providing specific details. The dog was a small, mixed-breed male, around 2 years old, with a red collar that had once borne a name tag reading Milo. The tag had fallen off, presumably before the dog strayed too far from home. The owner explained how a family crisis, followed by a personal health emergency, had led to a situation where the dog apparently slipped away unnoticed by neighbors. Keanu felt torn. On one hand, this was exactly what he had hoped for during those endless weeks of searching. On the other, he and Scout, no Milo, had forged a bond that felt as real as any he'd known. Was he truly willing to part ways now? They arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a local park. Keanu arrived early with Scout, who happily sniffed around the grass. Butterflies fluttered in Keanu's stomach. He tried to gauge his own feelings, dread, hope, or something else entirely. When the owner finally arrived, Keanu recognized the look of someone who had endured a heavy emotional toll. A young woman, her face etched with fatigue, approached them slowly. The moment her eyes settled on Scout, they welled with tears. She knelt down, calling softly, "Milo, is it you, boy?" Scout hesitated at first, as if trying to place her. Keanu watched, heart pounding, as Scout took a few cautious steps forward. A sniff, another sniff, and suddenly Scout's tail wagged in wild circles. He lunged toward the woman, burying his nose into her shoulder. She wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming, and Keanu felt an undeniable lump in his throat. "It's you," she whispered, pressing her cheek against Scout's fur. The dog licked her face with the exuberance of someone who had just recognized an old friend. The sight confirmed what Keanu already suspected. Scout and Milo had a history here, a loving connection that predated his time lost on the street. Keanu stepped aside to give them space, grappling with an onslaught of conflicting emotions. The woman, whose name was Irene, turned to Keanu after a few minutes of tearful reunion. "I can't thank you enough," she said, voice trembling with gratitude. "I never imagined this would actually happen. My life has been, well, it's been turned upside down, and I thought he was gone forever." With Scout still leaning into her arms, Irene explained the series of unfortunate events that led to Milo's disappearance. A family emergency took her out of town. A friend was supposed to watch Milo, but missed him slipping out during a thunderstorm, and then Irene herself ended up hospitalized due to a severe infection. By the time she recovered, too much time had passed, and her initial search efforts bore no fruit. Keanu understood the heartbreak in her story. He recalled all the hours he'd spent wondering if Scout had someone missing him like this. Now that he was face to face with the truth, a portion of him felt relieved that Scout's original family had indeed cared. Yet he also felt a profound sadness for the imminent goodbye he would have to say. What about the new lease? The deposit? The emotional bond that had blossomed between them? The tension in him must have shown, because Irene asked gently, were you going to adopt him yourself if no one came forward?" Keanu nodded, swallowing hard. "I've grown close to him. I call him Scout, but I know he's your Milo. I searched for you for weeks, but eventually I thought no one was going to show up. I'm glad you did, though. You clearly love him." She thanked him again, words pouring out in a rush of appreciation for his kindness, his determination, and the care he'd shown Milo. She even offered to compensate him for any vet bills or other expenses. Keanu shook his head. No, I don't need payment. Knowing he's going back to someone who really loves him, that's enough. Despite his words, the moment he handed over Milo's leash to Irene felt heavier than he expected. Milo, still panting happily, glanced back at Keanu. And in that glance, there was a bittersweet sense of closure. He scratched behind Milo's ears one last time, forcing a smile. Be good, buddy, he murmured. In the days that followed, Keanu adjusted to life in the new apartment. It felt quiet. No early morning tail wags. No companion to greet him when he came home late from class or the mechanic shop. The dog bed lay empty in the corner. He debated storing it away, but couldn't bring himself to do it just yet. Every so often, he would receive a text from Irene with pictures of Milo settling back in her home, looking healthy and content. Her updates were thoughtful, but they also tugged on Keanu's heartstrings, reminding him of what he'd lost, and also what he'd never truly owned. Marie and Carlos tried to lift his spirits, reminding him that he had done the right thing. If he truly believed in unconditional love, then letting Milo return to his real family was the ultimate act of selflessness. Deep down, Keanu knew they were right, but still stung. Sometimes love means letting go, especially when the rightful place for that love belongs elsewhere. Ironically, or maybe serendipitously, another opportunity soon surfaced. A colleague at the mechanic shop mentioned that a friend of a friend was looking to rehome a young shelter dog, a lab mix who'd been rescued from a large kill shelter down south. The dog, named Willow, was about a year old, spayed, and fully vaccinated. She'd been fostered temporarily, but needed a permanent place soon. The colleague casually remarked, "Hey, Keanu, you're a dog lover, right? I remember that story about you finding that lost pup. Interested in maybe adopting one that really needs a home?" It was as if the universe was nudging him forward. Keanu asked for details, photos, and a chance to meet Willow. The moment he laid eyes on her gentle gaze and her playful prance, something stirred in him, a sense of hope and second chances. He realized that his experience with Milo, as painful as it had been to say goodbye, had prepared him to open his heart again, this time to a dog who had no one else. 2 weeks later, Willow bounded through the doorway of Keanu's cozy studio, sniffing everything with excited curiosity. She took an immediate interest in the dog bed, pawing at it until she settled in comfortably. Keanu chuckled, feeling an unexpected surge of joy. While no dog could replace Milo, nor would he want that, Willow was her own shining spirit, ready to love and be loved. He texted Irene a final update, letting her know that he had adopted another dog. She replied with heartfelt congratulations and a photo of Milo, happily curled up on her sofa. The two parted ways with mutual gratitude, each finding in the other's story a reaffirmation that good things can happen when people choose compassion over convenience. In the end, Keanu's journey with the lost dog taught him more than he ever expected about responsibility, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond forged when kindness meets need. He learned that love, especially the unconditional kind we share with our animals, often arrives when we least anticipate it, and sometimes departs the same way. But even that departure can be an act of profound humanity, if it means reuniting a lost soul with the home where it truly belongs. As Willow curled up at Keanu's feet one evening, he looked around his small but welcoming apartment. A gentle lamp lit the room. His textbooks lay open on the table, notes scattered around from an unfinished assignment. On the windowsill, a potted plant swayed slightly from the breeze. And right there, in the heart of it all, was a reminder that spaces fill with warmth when they're shared, be it with a friend, a family member, or a dog who just needs someone to say, "You're safe here." All the bureaucratic hurdles, emotional highs and lows, and questions of right and wrong faded into a single truth. In moments of genuine compassion, we often discover that our hearts are bigger and braver than we ever knew. Keanu had taken a lost dog, turned his life upside down to do the right thing, and in the process learned the beauty and pain of letting go. The reward? A renewed understanding that love doesn't diminish. It transforms, creating space for new stories, new connections, and new reasons to believe in the better side of humanity. Have you ever shared a similar experience or witnessed an act of compassion that left you feeling hopeful about the world? Remember, the comment section is a place to tell your own tales, to connect with others who value kindness, and to keep this circle of empathy expanding. Where are you reading from right now? If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe or follow for more stories that celebrate the resilient bonds between people, animals, and the communities that bring them together. Because in a world often filled with confusion and conflict, it's in these small yet meaningful acts of empathy that we find the threads of unity we so desperately need.